So by way of introduction, gas extraction means heavy industry, which means heavy trucks. And for those of us with local roads, they were not designed to carry that kind of weight. So how bad can a road become? Well, just hang around for a few minutes and Lynn will show you. And is this just a scare tactic, or can all this happen and Lynn can help you get an appreciation for that as well? So, okay, now we understand that maybe this is an issue. Can we just keep the trucks off our roads? Well, actually, that flies in the face of interstate commerce, so that's a no for that. Then maybe we should just tell them that they need to get permits, and of course New York state law doesn't allow us to do that either, and Mike Keneally will talk about those things. But Environmental Conservation Law, Article 23, Section 0303 says local governments have authority to protect the roads. So what is that authority? And that's why we're here today, to kind of put all that together. And then assuming that we've come up with a way to exercise that authority, now we have to actually negotiate with the developer, and that's part of what Mark Sweeney will be talking about. So we're getting all three steps: how our roads are designed and what kind of locating capability they have, what are the authorities local governments have, and then how do we work with the developers. Very comprehensive, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of this. Just to give another idea of how we're going to structure this, Lynn is a college professor. He likes to take questions while he's talking, so please feel free to just ask questions as he goes along. He's not going to do a Q&A at the end, so just feel free to jump in. Mike has only got 45 minutes. He's got a lot to cover, so we're going to try to work through his, but he will work with Mark Sweeney at the Q&A at the end, which I think they'll tie together, so that'd be a great opportunity to work those questions through. And of course, you can always catch him on break too. He'll be right here, so we'll go from there. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming, and I don't want to wait any longer for Lynn to get up here and share his wisdom. Come on, Lynn.
Good morning, all. I got myself into the road building business a long time ago, and over the years have worked with the Cornell Local Roads Program to provide technical assistance and training for local governments across the state. And one of the things that we particularly have specialized in our research activities at Cornell is what I refer to as structural evaluation of roads, how to determine how long they will last and what strengthening measures are needed and so on. With the advent of the energy development plans in New York State for gas and wind and otherwise, it has made quite a challenge to how you can apply these technologies to effectively determine what's a fair way to deal with the providers of these developers of these resources and so on. Different states have come up with different plans. Pennsylvania has one. West Virginia has one. I understand, but I don't know very much about what Ohio is doing. And New York State seems to be laying back just a little bit, waiting to see what other places are doing. So my mission today is to try to give you some insight into what influences how much damage a given truck does to a road. And there are different kinds of roads and different times of the year, and it's a complex answer. I'm going to try to make it as understandable as I can, but I encourage you to ask questions. If I say something or use some engineering lingo that's not familiar to you, don't be hesitant to badger me till you have satisfaction that you know what I'm talking about, because sometimes I don't know that you don't know what I'm talking about. So without further ado, let's get going. Officially, the title of what I'm going to be talking about is Road Structure and Allocating Damage and Costs Equitably. It's that word equitably that makes it somewhat of a challenge, I think. Good roads are important. They provide a service throughout the year, public health. If you need it, you like to be able to get an ambulance without having to shovel snow for 13 miles to get to town, certainly. delivering groceries, various kinds of commerce, plus getting home at night, good roads make a difference. And we would like them to be able to perform their function throughout the year. Good roads cost substantially less to drive on. It's the case that we refer to something called road user costs. And road user costs are how much it costs you as a motorist to go a mile down a given road. That's very much a function of the condition of the road, as well as certain things about how you operate your vehicle, whether how fast you go, how good the tires are, all sorts of things, how good the shock absorbers are. But nevertheless, it is the case that poor roads cost substantially more to drive on than do good roads. So that matters. Good roads cost less to maintain. You can't totally ignore maintenance on good roads. They look pretty fine. Sometimes it's not intuitive to the public, maybe because we've trained the public to believe that the first time they're going to see the highway department is when the road's all broken up, and any high school kid could tell you that it was time to repair the road. But in fact, the least cost time to repair a road is when it's still in good condition. And then finally, good roads will generate economic development and enhance property values. New York State is pretty well roaded. There's not a lot of new major routes that are going to be built in the future. Some subdivisions still yet to be built, perhaps, and some standards on what the roads in those subdivisions should look like can be promulgated. But as far as adding to our road system, we've got about 115,000 miles of road in this state, and that hasn't changed much in the last 30 years, and it's probably not likely to change much in the coming 30 years. So we're pretty well roaded. Thus, we can conclude that we've got the road system that we need. It goes where we need it to go. But how do we protect our roads, especially when you get into heavily loaded traffic? And so that's what we're going to talk about for a while. First of all, we need to understand the basic principles of what's going on with the road. This is a quote taken from an association, National Center for Pavement Preservation, which is headquartered at Michigan State University, but serves the whole United States. And they define the term pavement preservation as a cost-effective set of practices that extend pavement life and improve safety and motorist satisfaction while saving public tax dollars. And I would point out that it's not only public tax dollars, but your own pocket money that goes into roads that are safe and smooth and work well. So this association or society or center provides a lot of information for local governments to use in trying to determine what is the right thing to do at the right time in maintaining and preserving your roads. Let's begin by just talking about who owns the road. Believe it or not, well, you all might be pretty familiar with this. An awful lot of folks have absolutely no sense of whose road they're on at any given moment in time. The road network in New York State is kind of like a bowl full of different colored spaghetti. If we treat the pink roads as state highways and the green roads, which don't look too much different than the yellow ones here, unfortunately, the green roads as town roads, and then we got some county roads, and they're all kind of stirred together. And as you're going down a given road, you may be on a town road for a while and it may change to a county road. Town road could link to a state highway or it could link to a county road. You can have little villages, and villages have their own road systems, as do cities, and their own public works departments. Perhaps near the village there's residential land use, houses fairly spaced out in the surrounding area. Get a little further out, you get into agricultural land use. Maybe up at the top of the hill is some state forest that's logged for timber and recreation, hiking, all sorts of different things. Maybe even some skiing in there. And the road system provides access for all these different functions. But generally speaking, it's not straightforward. And when you're starting to figure out, well, what are going to be the consequences of traffic that was not originally anticipated at the time the road system was laid out and built, if we suddenly make a shift in the usage of that road, even for a short period of time, 3-6 months, we can use up a lot of the life of the road in a fairly short period of time if it's a weak road. If it's a strong road, like the state highway, may not have any impact at all. You may not even notice the difference. You can categorize roads by the administrative unit, whether it's owned by the town or administered by the town, the county, the city, the village, the state. We also use a functional classification system, interstate, arterial, collector, local. Roadside land use is another way of categorizing particularly the local road system. Local roads constitute substantially more than half of the total road system in the United States. And did you know, as you go across the country on the interstate, looking out at the cows and the green grass and so on, did you know that about 55% of the road system in the United States is unpaved? Bet you didn't know that. How much in New York State? Close. 25% of the road system. So we're a little further along with getting the farmer out of the mud here in New York than the country as a whole. But nevertheless, a lot of local roads don't even have a pavement on them. There's about 110,000 miles of road in New York State. 15,000 miles of that's administered by the State Department of Transportation, leaving 95,000 miles administered by local agencies. 1,600, just a little bit more than 1,600 local governments take care of this road system. Towns, counties, cities, and villages. About 45,000 miles, and much of that on the town road system, is seasonally weak and really doesn't meet the structural needs of commercial traffic. So keep in mind that these roads are mostly rural. We call them low-volume roads. They're costly to drive on. Many have a limiting factor in economic development. One thing that came across my radar screen some while back, not that long ago, was a time when we switched from hauling milk from dairies in single-unit vehicles, steering axle and a drive axle, to semi-trucks, steering axle, drive axle, and trailer axle. And those larger vehicles had a hard time getting across weak bridges, weak pavements, tight alignments that weren't really ever engineered. They were roads that went from Bill's to John's barnyard and then on over to Pete's 100 years ago. And it was a pathway for a horse and buggy. And it got converted in the early 1900s into a town road. And along about 1990 or so, we switched over to using much larger milk hauling vehicles. Well, they couldn't maneuver these roads. So guess what? Some of you may be aware of the fact that Queen's Farms systematically dropped every dairy that was on a local road and went around signing up only dairies that were on main highways so they could get their trucks in and get their trucks out. Too bad for anybody that was in the dairying business that was off on one of these side roads. That's just one of many examples of how our road system, particularly the weak roads that we have and the poorly aligned roads that we have, can be a factor in economic development. How come nobody's interrupted me yet? Too early in the morning? Okay, let's do something together. I want you all to say the word something. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Something. Now you can go back and say you said something at the meeting. All right. So, state highways. Generally speaking, the alignment of state highways was engineered, meaning that the layout, the alignment, its curvature, vertical as well as horizontal, was calculated. Pavement thickness was calculated. The traffic was determined and predicted in advance. And the pavements were designed to support a substantial number of very heavy vehicles. And if you hit a road like that with a burst of heavy traffic for development of a gas well, say, over a period of 3 or 6 months, it's probably not going to have any consequence at all on a road like that. Use up a minuscule fraction of the life of the road. And there's county roads. They don't all look this good. Yes, sir?
One question. So there was a report that came out some time ago from the New York State DOT predicting a certain large cost to the state due to heavy truck traffic. How does that jive with your statement that the state highways will be relatively unimpacted? What costs were they looking at?
I suspect what you're thinking about was associated with the garbage hauling up into, where is it, Cuga County, I think?
No, this is a quote-unquote leaked document where New York State DOT was looking at impact of frac trucks.
Of frac trucks? Well, I disagree with them. I don't know what was motivating such a thing, but we've run some numbers in our operation at Cornell, and according to our calculations, you wouldn't know it on a state highway. For one well, now if you had hundreds and hundreds of these things going on for years, that's a different colored horse, but the impact of just adding a little bit more truck traffic to what's already out there. If you're dealing with roads that have 10,000 vehicles a day, 5 to 10% truck traffic, and you add another 1,000 trucks, I think you know, without even having to calculate stresses and strains, that it's not going to have a major impact. County roads, these are a pair of them. T intersection of a couple of roads that are in pretty good shape. As I say, they don't all look this good. We'll see some that look a little worse coming up. Here's a town road. Fairly thin surface. You can see from the shadow that it's probably not much more than about an inch of blacktop there. Actually, that's the accumulation of, I believe, 2 or 3 chip seals that makes that surface. You can see it raveling along the edges. What may not be obvious is water that runs off that road has a hard time getting into this ditch because of the accumulation of sand from winter operations of salting and sanding, and the grass grows up through it and actually causes the ditch to move over to right along the edge of the road, which is not a major enhancement of the lifetime of the road. Road strength isn't constant throughout the year. That's a principle that I'd like you to remember. Local roads often are seasonally weak due to poor drainage, due to the use of low-quality materials. What do I mean by low-quality materials? Well, sometimes we open up a gravel pit and it's got a lot of silt and clay in it. Not ideal for serving as the base course for a road. It might have been fine once upon a time when that road was a gravel road. It had to have some silt and clay in it to hold the larger stones in place, give it a little bit of abrasion resistance and so on. But it wasn't paved, so any moisture that got in there could come up through, the road could breathe, and it would evaporate away. Enough fines in there to shed water so that water didn't penetrate going down from above too much. But then we pave over it. We say, let's pave our roads. So we get out there and we put a thin surface, just a membrane. And you've all had the experience of laying a tarp or a tent or something like that out on your lawn overnight in the summertime. Next morning you get up and you lift that tarp up, and what's dripping from the bottom side of the tarp but a whole bunch of water, right? So that's evidence that that water comes up. When it hits an impassable surface like the plastic tarp or a sheet of paper or whatever, it condenses in the cool air and makes the area right beneath it very wet. You put together the combination of water and high fines content, high silt clay content of the materials, and you wind up with a situation where the bearing capacity, the structural supporting strength of the material, is very poor. So such roads deteriorate rapidly, especially if you have heavyweight traffic. And so we'd like to avoid creating any more of these if we can. What do we do about it? Well, we have to pay attention to the drainage needs of the road. Putting out cones doesn't make the water go away. We need some downhill. You can see that the water has caused regional cracking in the area of the surface because of the combination of water and weak materials beneath the surface. And spring thaw aggravates that situation quite a bit. This is sort of a concept of how road strength or bearing capacity or load supporting capability varies with time of the year here in New York State. If we go from January to December, and when the ground is frozen, the road is beaucoup strong, very strong. Probably can't hurt it with the biggest loads you could throw at it. But then we get into a period of weakening with that interaction between water, thaw. Generally roads thaw from the top down as well as from the bottom up. And so you wind up with a situation where there's high moisture content in the road, and then a still frozen zone, and then a never frozen zone. And that still frozen zone prevents water from going down, and it's usually too cool to promote any evaporation of consequence. And so it's sort of like trying to drive a truck on a waterbed. It doesn't work too good. But gradually over time, as we go through the spring and on into the summer, there's a continual increase in strength until we get frost penetration back down in the road again, and it goes up to very strong. That's pretty much what happens. So when we drive a vehicle on a road that exhibits this kind of characteristic, it makes a whale of a difference how much damage for a single pass a given vehicle would make, whether it was right here at the bottom of spring thaw, or whether it passed right there at the top of the frost season. How much damage it does. All roads are stronger when they're frozen and weaker during thaw. That's true of state highways and local roads and so on. Just the magnitude of that difference between winter and summer is a lot more noticeable on local roads. So, the damage per pass of one truck is not the same on strong state highways versus weak local roads. The damage per pass of one truck is not the same at different times of the year on a given road. And thus, cost allocation, when we try to figure out what the bill to the user of the road should be, cost allocation based on the number of truck passes is a flawed approach. And to the best of my understanding, that's exactly what Pennsylvania is using. They just said, tell me how many truck passes you're going to have, and we'll tell you how much you owe us for damage to the road. And I'm saying, well, now wait a minute. It makes a heck of a lot of difference whether those trucks went over in December or whether they went over in March as to how much of the life of the road got used. So we need to get a little bit more sophisticated, I think, than just a cost per trip or damage per pass or a cost per pass type of approach. Roads deteriorate over time. This is referred to as the performance curve. Now our time span is in years, and that could vary from one category of road to another. For a state highway, the time from real good condition to totally gone to pot might be 30, 40 years. on that chip sealed road that I was showing you earlier at the town road might be 3 or 4 years. So a lot depends on the structure that's there, what this time scale is, but all roads tend to follow this kind of a pattern that when they're new, they stay in pretty good condition for about 2/3 of the life of the road. And then the effects begin to become evident. And finally, as we get down into what we refer to as fair and poor condition, we begin to see visible distress. Well, that leads to an interesting thing. If we try to figure out how to allocate costs for road damage based upon distress, going out and charting the cracks and the ruts and so on and so forth, we've got to have distress in order to be able to do that. Which means that if you happen to have a road that was recently rebuilt, 6 months may only be just using up a little bit of piece there, but it may foreshorten the time for reconstruction by a substantial amount, but you don't see any damage. So if you only used a visible damage method of approach, there would be some roads where you wouldn't see any effect of the truck traffic, but the effect is still there in the road. Yeah, questions?
So my point is that this road performance curve works for all roads, whether they're interstate highways or town roads, but they're assuming a certain amount of weight that they're carrying or a certain amount of stress that they're seeing. And if you change that stress to make that consistent between all roads, then the curve would be much shorter than it is for a town road and would be much longer for
as I pointed out earlier, it is the case that 15,000 miles of road that's administered by the state has a huge force of people that figure out what needs to be there. But what do we do with county roads and town roads and village roads and so on? Well, there hasn't been too much change in traffic over time. There's 1 or 2% growth per year in a high growth area and less than that in a standard growth area. And so if things don't change much more than that in, say, a 10, 15, 20-year period, you're not going to see too much difference between when this road is in new condition and when it's used up. And so we develop a balance then of our knowledge. And remember, when we divide the state up into 1,600 units of local government, each unit of local government has a small patch, slightly larger than a breadbasket, but smaller than would extend across different physiographic regions or different soil types and so on. So we gain from experience, and we know what we need to do, and we have a pretty good sense of how long it's going to last. So the person in charge of the road system does what is needed when it comes time to reconstruct or recondition a road, does what's needed based upon past experience. If after that commitment has been made and the taxpayers have forked over their money to build that road, then there's suddenly a jump in particularly the heavy truck traffic, even for a short period of time, like 6 months, which is about how long it takes to develop a wellhead. You wind up with a situation where you can use up a pretty large portion of the life of a road under those circumstances. So the engineered road isn't as adversely affected as the ones that are designed by experience.
And one other follow-up question. Typically, local governments don't let the roads go all the way to the point where they need to be reconstructed. So what would this curve look like if you were to do some intermediate repair or resurfacing?
Well, it depends on what you do for the intermediate repair. If you do crack filling and patching, that's not going to add much structural strength to the road. And in fact, it's probably going to add roughness to the surface. And in fact, it's roughness that determines the cost to drive on a roadway. And so certain types of maintenance activities actually help preserve the road by keeping water from getting beneath it, but they can actually adversely affect the driver's costs to drive on the road. If we get a little bit further and start talking about thin surfacing, like an inch or inch and a half or 2-inch hot mix overlay or something like that, now we add some structural capacity, we make it smooth, and depending upon the weather and the materials that are underneath this improvement, some of those cracks will come back eventually. The idea is about an inch per year. So if you had a badly cracked surface and you put down a 2-inch surface on top of that, you'd expect that it would be a couple years before those cracks would begin to come up through and show themselves on top. How do you avoid that? Well, there's technologies like milling off the old surface so you get rid of the cracks, and now you put a substantial structural layer down, and then that'll last a lot longer. Did I over-answer your question, or did I answer your question?
Thanks.
Okay. The thing I'd like you to notice is that here, that the distress doesn't begin to show up until you get over into the last third or so of the life of the road. And Don's right. If you repair that road, put it back up to good again, smooth and good and very good condition, here it costs less to do that than if you wait until it's badly deteriorated and then try and do it. Yes, sir?
If I understand what you've just said, if you wanted to charge the trucker for the decrease in lifetime of the road, it would not be enough just to measure the decrease in the quality of the road. You'd have to know where on this curve you were, which might be tough to do.
And there's a better curve that you could work with. We'll work our way toward that better curve here in a few minutes. All right, so just to define what we're talking about when we talk about very good and fair and poor and so on and so forth, here's some photos that I took around Tompkins County. This one I think would classify as very good condition. Someday I'll probably get shot for saying this, but any idiot can make a road smooth and flat and black on the day that the paving machine moves off, and that's what you're seeing here. The real talent is that it still looks like that in 20 years. So that's very good condition at the moment the photo was taken. Not too much different between very good and good. There's the occasional little crack here and there. If you look very carefully, you can begin to see some rippling in the surface. That adds a little bit of vibration, a little bit of roughness, a little wear and tear, a little more wear and tear on the traveling vehicles than they would have if it was perfectly smooth. Here we've got some patching, minor cracking, probably due to frost heaving, maybe utility cut. So that's fair condition. This could either be fair or poor, but over here on the side it's poor. Out here in the middle it's fair, so I just call that fair to poor. This is definitely getting into the poor condition. There's a big patch that I'm standing on there, and some pretty significant roughness. Longitudinal cracking, transverse cracking, pothole. So that's about what you'd call poor. And here we get to very poor. Hit that at 50 miles an hour, it'll definitely rattle your teeth. You can tell that somebody threw something in there once upon a time, but apparently they didn't come back as it raveled away. So that actually makes it rougher, that added material there. Sharp edges on that pothole. It'll catch water every time it rains, soaks the water into the gravel underneath. That gravel looks pretty dirty to me. It's got a lot of silt and clay in it. What's the consequence of this? Well, this is a road user cost curve. Same scale as before. Whoop. Same scale as before. Very good down to very poor. And in very good condition, it's not free to drive down the road. This is cost typically in cents per vehicle mile. Probably on the order of 35 to 40 cents when you take taxes out. You have to be very careful about how you do this economics of roads, when you account for taxes. Because where does the highway department get its money to build the road? Taxes. Who's paying the road user costs? The driver. Who's paying the taxes to the highway department to build the road? The driver. And so if you aren't careful how you handle the numbers, you'll double count those taxes. And so this is on the order of 35 to 40 cents. Now, if we call that the baseline, base cost, then as the road condition goes down, the cost to drive on the road can actually double by the time you get down to that pothole, rough, miserable, rattle your teeth kind of a very poor condition. I refer to that as the excess road user cost due to the poor condition. So the excess cost is 0 up here, and it just gets bigger and bigger the longer we wait. So you're not only saving money for the highway department to repair a road and make it smooth when it's not too badly deteriorated, but you're also avoiding the portion of this cost curve which really adversely affects the driver as well.
Sorry, but the other way around, have the cost be vertical?
I used to have it the other way around. I switched it so that it would tend to, well, you know the other graph that I had there. I wanted to get two scales that were common rather than having it vertical on one and horizontal on the other. Shoot me. It's okay. Another question? So, highway department spends money to build a road and maintain it. Road users spend money to drive on the road. Vehicle depreciation, gas, oil, tires, new shock absorbers every now and then, so on and so forth. How many here would say that the road user cost is 50% or less of the sum of the two parts? How much the highway department spends to build and maintain the road, plus how much the road user spends to drive on the road. All the traffic collectively. 50% or less is road user costs, 50% or more is highway department costs. How many would go there? Couple. Okay. Wrong. Too low. I know I did. I sucked you right in, didn't I? So let's bump it up here. How many of you would, I'll tell you that we're too low at 50% road user costs. How many of you would go with 75% road user cost, 25% highway department? Now how many of you we got in the game? Plus all of those that raised their hand earlier, right? Because you're covered. Okay, still wrong. Shall we go for 90? How many of you would say road user costs are about 90%, highway agency costs are about 10%? Show of hand. Not very many. How many of you say it's more than 90? Couple. Well, it doesn't make too much difference whether we're talking interstate highway or whether we're talking town road. It ranges in a fairly narrow band between 90 and 95% of all the costs of going on a road is road user costs. 5 to 10 cents on a dollar is paid for by the agency, spread out over a substantial number of years. And so when I see a road in very poor condition, my wallet begins to twitch and I begin to say, please, please, please spend a penny of your damn nickel to make my 55 cents per vehicle mile go down to 45 cents, if you would, please. And it turns out to be very cost effective to keep roads in smooth condition. But how on earth would you explain, with all the training we've given the citizens of New York State, that we don't come out and fix roads until they cause complaints? How would you explain to people that you're out there repaving a road that looks perfectly good? Be tough, wouldn't it, when there's other priorities? Those funds have to compete, those roads have to compete for funds with other priorities. So we can let it go. But the consequence of letting it go is this excess road user cost. If the public knew what we're doing to them in terms of excess road user cost by having weak and deteriorated roads, they'd probably get pretty concerned. So I was planning on sending an article into the Syracuse newspaper to tell everybody this. So basic engineering principles. What causes road failure? Heavy loads, lots of traffic, seasonally weak materials, poor drainage, and just the passage of time, which in engineering parlance we call it cumulative damage. All of these cause that condition curve to take a dive eventually and go from good to poor condition. What's going on in the roadway underneath the vehicle tire? Let's think of it as a truck tire. It's got a tire pressure that pushes on the surface and an axle load that pushes on the whole system, which bends the surface, it bends the base course, and puts a vertical pressure on the subgrade. Heavy loads cause big deflections. Why do we care? Because big deflections cause roads to not last very long. So why are our state highways able to withstand lots of heavy trucks and town roads aren't? Well, they put more substance in there. They typically use better quality materials, and they sure as heck put them down a lot thicker. I and my colleague David Orr have been out coring roads around New York State on state highways and for a research project over the last few years. We've come up with as much as, I think the biggest that we came to was 17 inches of asphalt concrete that had sort of been accumulated over time on roads that were perhaps first paved around 1930 or so, but you'd see a layer and then another layer and then another layer and another layer, and by the time you cut a hole in it, it was 17 inches deep. And that was just the asphalt. And underneath that was a heavy layer of unbound gravel as well. So what happens when weak roads are subjected to heavy trucks at the wrong time of the year? You get rutting and cracking. And this is a particularly good example because it's got both cracking and rutting and potholes and patches. By golly, this is classic. Used to have a colleague that said no student project was ever a total failure. It always could be used as a good, bad example. And I think this is, without any doubt, a good, bad example. So let's think about something that you've probably done absent-mindedly, just sitting at your desk or somewhere in history. You took a paper clip and bent it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and pretty soon you had two halves of a paper clip, did you not? Anybody here who has not yet done that? 100%. Okay, we have something we can talk about together then. So if you took a paper clip and bend it till it repeatedly breaks, but let's make it a little more complicated. Let's take a dozen paper clips and have three conditions. One, we open it up to 45 degrees and then fold it back down. Take a different paper clip out of the pile, open it up to 90, bend it back down to closed. And then another one, 135, which is 90 plus 45, and bend it back down. What do you suppose is going to happen? Eventually, they're all going to break, but the one with the bigger angle is going to not take so long. So here's what it looks like. 135 degrees, just a couple of bends back and forth, and it's kaput. At 90 degrees, it lasts a little longer, and the average, you'll notice how the data is scattered. In other words, a statistician would say it's stochastic. It's not, you don't get the same number of repetitions to failure out of every paper clip. But as a group, you can begin to find an average. So the blue line represents the average. And the average at 90 is about 28 repetitions to failure. These are the big, hefty paper clips, not those cheap little things with notches in them and so on. Okay, so now let's make it even more fun. Let's bend one paper clip 10 times at 90 and 22 times at 45. Who can tell me whether it'll break or not? No? What makes you say no? Who said that? You're right. Here's how I know that you're right. We'll take that curve. I'll discard the data points because we don't need them. We'll just work with the blue line. So at 90, we could allow 28, but we're only going to put on 10. So 10 repetitions out of 28 allowable is 36% of the life of that paperclip. Now we'll bend it to 45. We could expect to get 52 repetitions, but we're only going to give it 22. Remember, back here? 22 of these and 10 of those. So 22 divided by 52 gives us the sum of those two adds up to 78%. That's the cumulative damage. It's stochastic, so it might break at 78%, but that's far enough away from the line that I would be willing to put my money on that it wouldn't break. So you're right. You see how that works? This could be a heavy truck, and this could be a not quite so heavy truck. This could be a heavy truck, this could be a not quite so heavy truck, that could be a Volkswagen. But depending upon the vehicle, the amount of damage per pass of the vehicle differs as a function of the loading. So, when you try to apply that principle of the paperclip to a road with the knowledge of past traffic and seasonal pavement response, in terms of pavement response, that's just fancy words for the deflection of the road, the percent of life used to date can be determined. And that is what I refer to as benchmarking. The consequence of adding more than normal heavy traffic can be predicted, and this enables allocation of costs, especially if I leave it alone, enables allocation of costs due to the added traffic. Okay? So we have a mechanism here. If we have this kind of information for the materials, and if we have a means of measuring the pavement deflection or the pavement response, now we can get into something that's got some science behind it that makes it possible for us to figure out what would happen if we had a burst of heavy traffic superimposed on top of the normal traffic. And we could see how much of the life of the road is used by the heavy traffic and how much is going to be used by the remainder of the traffic. Now we need to talk a little bit about policy, because while there's engineering that influences things, policy as developed by boards, policy-making boards, has an impact too. As we mentioned earlier, we got a road that's built by the community to last a given period of time. Or instead of period of time, we could talk about it in terms of number of load repetitions. One would translate to the other. And that's based on historical traffic levels and experience. So the reason why we have 3 inches of asphalt and 12 inches of gravel is because that worked over the last 25 or 50 years. Typically, what we do is designed to last, or expected to last, 10 to 15 years, or perhaps even longer. But a few months of heavyweight traffic is unplanned for and may substantially foreshorten the remaining life of the road, whether we're really going to realize the original expectation of 10 to 15 years. It'll be less than that. So the policy aspect of it is the taxpayers aren't actually going to get the full life of the road due to the unexpected heavy traffic. Should the taxpayers pay for the lost life, or should the road user, particularly the one who's putting the heavy traffic on, pay for it? When and how much should the road user pay? Should it be paid before the first truck hits the road or after the last one pulls off? What's the best strategy? And this cumulative damage concept is the key. Question?
So my understanding from listening to you speak before and being my neighbor and having walked the roads with you as well is that local roads that are not designed can actually take very few truck trips. And can you talk about general load carrying capability of an interstate highway versus a state road versus a county versus a town? How many trucks they could take? I know you speak in terms of easels, and maybe you want to define that term and just spend a little time with that.
Yeah, I was not going to get into easels today, but I can. Easel is an acronym for equivalent single axle load. We can take a mixture of traffic, everything from Volkswagens to overloaded trucks, and translate them into an equivalent number of single axles, 18,000-pound single axles, which was used in research back around 1960 or so. And by doing that, it makes the computations more simple. We can talk in terms of how many easels wellhead development is going to apply, how many easels the road can expect to last. Instead of talking about it in terms of years, we can talk about it in terms of repetitions, basically, of load. As to the question, how many easels a state highway can take, or how many loads heavy trucks, well, one heavy truck, one legally loaded truck, semi-truck, would typically apply 2 to 2.5 equivalent single axle loads per pass, okay, on that order. And that stands. There's not too much force on the weight on the front steering axle. And then there's a drive axle, and then there's a trailing axle, and those two are about equally loaded. So the 2.5 is kind of intuitive in the way that we, and the state law controls how much load you can have per axle, how much load you can have as a gross vehicle weight, and so on and so forth. Most of that is promulgated to protect the bridges, but it also affects the life of pavements as well. So built into the design then of state highways is the capability to take a much larger number. Exactly how many? Well, all state highways are not created equally. They're not all located in the Adirondacks. They don't all have poor drainage and silt clay underneath the roads. So whether you're up near Rochester or over near Hudson River or out on glacial moraine called Long Island, or up near some ski resort in Lake Placid, the bearing capacity of the native material differs, so therefore the structural design has to be adapted to that reality of the weather, the interaction of the weather and the native materials that the road is trying to protect. But we would still expect to get something on the order of 1 million to 3 million easels on a state highway, and maybe not any more than 100,000 on a town road over its lifetime, on that order of magnitude.
You've taught us that the change in lifetime does not correlate with the change in condition. Are we supposed to learn from this which of those two you're going to tell us the trucker should pay for?
Yep.
That's still to come.
I would have the trucker pay, or the developer of the energy resource pay for the percent of the life that they used, whether the road was in good shape when they started and still in good shape when they ended, or whether it was so close to the end of its life that after they were done there was hardly anything left in the way of a road. Nevertheless, through this methodology, one can determine what percent of the life of the road was used by this burst of heavy traffic. And the way we will do that is through the road use agreement, where we get the developer to tell us how many vehicles are coming in and out. And from that, we translate it to easels. From that, we can determine the life used, the cumulative damage done by that particular traffic, which was unanticipated when the road was paid for by the taxpayers. Yes, sir.
This seems to be, that argument seems to be inconsistent with when you were talking about that you showed that there's, you said there was dramatic difference in the strength of the road based on the time of year.
Exactly.
And this is not, you're just taking trips in here, you're not factoring that into this equation. So how do we factor that in if we're trying to determine the amount of deterioration of the road?
If you noticed, earlier today, I already have given you a pat on the back, so therefore I don't have to rush over and give you another one. But you're leading right into where I'm headed with this presentation. I'll get there pretty quickly now. So, a large number of heavy trucks at an unfavorable time of the year can do serious road damage, is the point. What regulatory measures are available to you? Well, obviously, wrong button. Load limitations is one thing you can do, but that impacts on everybody. The traffic that the road was originally developed to be used for, how many school buses are less than 4 tons? Not very bloody many. How many garbage packers are under that? How many fuel oil trucks are under that? So you kind of need to be cautious about how you implement policies in this regard, or you can have a huge negative impact on the local economics. I'm not going to go too much into the authority because that's the subject of the next speaker, and I promised him I would only just kiss this. Authority is conveyed to municipalities via several state laws. One of them, of course, is the Municipal Home Rule Law, which specifically allows towns, villages, and cities the power to adopt local laws relating to the management and use of its highways, roads, streets, and property. That's pretty vague. Town Law 130 authorizes town boards to establish a permit system allowing work in the right-of-way to construct pipelines, whatever, driveway entrances, and so on. More meaty is a set of laws in the vehicle and traffic law that need to be adopted by local law or ordinance that enable you to set weight limits, designate truck routes, and set hours of operation for use of such vehicles. So you have the authority. And you really don't even have to write your own laws to do that. You can just cite and adopt these sections of vehicle and traffic law. Up on the web at the Cornell Local Roads Program website, and you can Google Local Roads Program or even just Google local roads. I think Cornell comes up top of the list. At our website, you can get a little booklet of model laws that you can use to adopt these model ordinances that you could use to adopt these laws. How do you implement it? Well, there's a set of steps that I would recommend. One of them, first of all, is to establish traffic volume trigger points. What the heck does that mean? Typically, the way that's defined is, so we say that for a road user that's going to apply more than X number of truck trips, the following applies. So that try to set that level to where it doesn't prevent the traditional users of the road from using it, but when somebody's going to come in and intensively use the road for a short period of time, they would trip the trigger point and thus be subject to the remaining items on the list here. One thing you want to be cautious about, I've seen some trigger points where they just say number of vehicles without any indication of what unit of time. 10,000 trucks over 10 years or over 3 months makes one hell of a difference. And so, and then what 3 months are you going to do it? And so on. So need to establish that as a part of your policies. Then develop a road use agreement for those that trip the trigger point. Then they come in and sit down and they apply for a permit. And in the permitting process, you ask questions like, how many easels or trucks do you anticipate are going to be coming in? And everything that goes in has to come out. So it's going to load the road twice, especially a narrow road. And you establish an agreement of what it is that people should do in response to the damage. What damage? We'll get to that in a second here. We benchmark the existing road conditions. The way that we do that typically is to begin by doing a surface condition analysis, a distress analysis, and just go out for those roads that are distressed and document that. If they're in great shape, well, you document that too. That has a role to play. Having done that, you upgrade certain roads if needed to support heavy trucks so that you can provide a designated route for going in and coming out from the impact site. And when you think about this bowl of spaghetti concept of the way road systems are laid out in New York State, it may very well be that in order to get access to a particular piece of ground for development of say, a gas resource, several different flavors of road are going to be used. Some town roads, some county roads, maybe some village roads. All the parties involved in laying out this route have to be in agreement with each other, and the route has to be capable of handling that traffic. Yes, sir? You're going to get some exercise here, Don.
So my question on the upgrading certain roads is, who's paying for that? Are you suggesting that's paid for as part of the road use agreement, or is that taxpayer dollars to get the roads ready for the traffic?
No, I would say that that's a primary element of the road use agreement, is how much and when. Is it, if you want the money, it's always somebody that forgets to put the phone on vibrator. If you need the funds to upgrade the road before the traffic begins, that can be something that the parties agree to or they don't agree to. You find that out in advance of giving the permit. It's an element of the permitting process. If you want to wait and have them provide their share of the cost of the road damage after the project is completed, that's another strategy. There's the engineering answer to the problem, but there's also the policy issue, and this is where they get stirred together and can be symbiotic with each other. Okay, you load zone weak roads to protect them from damage, and then finally you establish local laws to regulate heavy trucks, their weight, routes, height, length, width, hours of operation, color of their truck, number of tires per axle, or whatever you wish to regulate. Benchmarking. Two ways to approach it, or you might say there's one way to approach it, two ways to approach it, the good way and the bad way. But another way to look at it is to look at the assessment of the functional condition. That's the distress survey, in which you quantify the extent and severity of distresses. And there's no rush to do this, so it can be done with municipal forces. You can hire a high school kid to do this. Cornell Local Roads Program has a summer intern program that some municipalities, several hundred municipalities, have participated in over time to do this type of a thing. And then the other aspect of it is to assess the structural condition of the road. And that's where the meat of this process of calculation and determination of cost allocation comes into play. In the structural condition analysis, you measure the response, that would be the deflection to a dynamic load, predict the remaining life at current traffic levels, calculate expected damage due to the heavy traffic, calculate the required strengthening if you're going to do it in advance, and that requires engineering expertise. You can't just do this with a pocket calculator. One note, functional ratings alone are not sufficient to predict cumulative damage and allocate costs, because of the fact that particularly roads in good condition don't show much change in distress. Functional ratings are very useful, however, to locate weak links in the road network. So here's that same road network, now without attribution as to who owns the road, but which roads are strong, the green ones, and which ones have been determined to be weak. And weak roads typically are going to show more distress. You don't have a weak road in good condition for very long. And so...
Wait a second. You can have a weak road in good condition for a long time if it has low traffic.
True. But still...
I don't trust you after that hand-raising incident.
Oh, really? Keep me honest. Yeah, if you had a weak road and nobody drove on it, what would it look like after 20 years? Would it be as good as it was the day it was born, or would it be partially shot, even though nobody used it?
Partially shot due to moisture.
Due to frost heave more than anything else, because of the materials the road's built out of. But look at point A down here. Whoop, got to get point A back. Point A, that's somebody wants to develop a gas well right there. And they have to go a little ways on this road that's in weak condition. And you probably wouldn't route them through the state forest. You'd probably route them out to the state highway and be done with them. After they're on the state highway, they're not your problem anymore. Look at point B. Shortest distance to the state highway is down this road here, but it's weak. So you're faced with giving them access to this green road and going a little bit further, or strengthening this road here in order to make it feasible. That might be worth a lot to the developer to have a shorter route, and he might be more willing to pony up to help you strengthen that road than to spend all the extra travel time and money, especially if when he gets out to the state highway he wants to go in that direction. So circumstances differ, and each one of these has to be looked at individually. You can't just generalize on what would be best. Here, you'd probably want to strengthen that little piece of weak road to get out to the other road. Now, if we can do this just right, you'll see that down, whoop, damn it. Well, hello, okay, we're back. The point that I was trying to make was that the same agency probably owns these two roads here. But over here, who's going to strengthen that road? The road permit probably will be issued by the town, but the road strengthening needs to be done on the county road. If you look the way I drew that, you see that? So you need to be able to work with your other agencies. Not a good idea to get each other disliking each other if you want to get cooperation in situations like this. Structural evaluation of the road can be done with this device, and we're going to have one parked outside the front door at the end of the morning, so you get a chance to actually look at it. But quickly, just for the moment, I'll show you how it works. There's no sound with this, so you're not missing something. Trailer mounted rig pulls up to a spot. Need traffic control. Lower the apparatus. Those things down here are transducers that measure the road deflection. There's the falling mass. We'll get another look at it in a second. Computer in the tow vehicle measures, or takes the signals and stores them. It's about 400 pounds of steel, generates about 28,000 pounds of load on the road. Physics works. It's a load cell that measures the load versus time. When you're done testing, the plate goes up, put the truck in gear, wait for the car to pass that's coming by. I could see it in the bumper there. And drive off to the next spot, which would typically be 125 to 200 feet down the road when you're doing this kind of thing. So what we're after with this is we use this device to measure deflection, and this represents how the deflections distribute themselves with distance away from the center of the load. We need to know the thickness of the layers, which we typically get by either historical records or coring. And the property that we're trying to measure from this is these E values, modulus of elasticity, which can then be used to calculate the stresses and strains. If you recall that diagram that I showed earlier of the wheel load with the tension in the bottom of the surface course and the compression on top of the subgrade, what we're trying to do is to come up with the information that we need to know about the road and its materials to enable us to calculate those stresses and strains. So it allows us to determine the engineering properties of the pavement layers, predict remaining life, calculate required strengthening or overlay thickness, and it enables us to allocate costs due to cumulative damage by unexpected heavyweight vehicles. And that's where that paperclip analogy that we were talking about earlier gets put to work. So in summary, what should you do? Establish a road use agreement, benchmark your roads before they get used, identify the strong and weak portions of the road system, post reasonable load limits for the roads that would be materially injured by a substantial increase in heavy trucks, identify acceptable truck routes to utilize the strong portion of your road system, and if necessary, strengthen some roads. Don, I've got 4 minutes left for any remaining questions, so let's use them wisely. Yes, sir.
Something you touched on at the beginning about the seasonal variations.
Yes.
You're probably hoping this question wouldn't come up because I don't think the answer is a simple one, but we all agree that in the winter when the roads are frozen, you can obviously put more load on there.
That's right.
Last winter we had a long, cold winter. I think it was pretty easy to tell when the road was frozen and when it wasn't.
It almost wasn't frozen this last winter.
Right, this last winter. Yeah, this is where I'm going.
Even in the Adirondacks, we didn't get much in the way of ground freezing.
Okay, so if you had a winter like this past winter, you're saying that the road, there pretty much wasn't any freezing down there. Okay.
Right, and so heavy truck traffic in the wintertime, if you just categorically allow it without any limitations, and then you get a winter like we just went through, you could do a lot of damage to the road.
Okay. How would you, if we had a winter where it was swinging between 20 for a month and then 30 for a month and 40, how would you be able to track that, kind of figure out when it's frozen and when it's not?
That's actually a very good question, and you're right. It is a somewhat complicated answer. We were in the second phase of a very substantive research project at Cornell to come up with the ability to model the change in those E values with season of the year through knowledge of basic index properties of the material and knowing what the weather is, basically. And from those models, we could be able to deal with the different seasons of the year. So what you do is you, just like we look at the effect of different load levels, we can look at the effect of different seasons. Divide the year up into, say, 4, winter, spring, summer, fall. Typically, it's better to divide it up into 6 seasons, one of which is spring thaw, and then there's the frozen period, and after the thaw, and as it gains strength, and so on. And with a computer, it's very easy to do this kind of stuff. You just program a loop, and once you've written the program, you can use it thousands of times. And so it's called mechanistic analysis, and it's pretty well advanced at this point. Yes, ma'am.
So how often does the DOT do road assessment, if indeed they do, on a regular basis? The second part was, I assume that's done regionally, and then connecting that up to what Bill asked you about the leaked memo, was that based on possibly an assessment they had done?
The answer is that the State Department of Transportation uses a method of pavement design that was developed back in the period 1959 to 1961 by the American Association of State Highway Officials. And through the 1993 Design Guide, certain materials index information is used that doesn't consider the change in the seasons and so on. It just uses what they call gravel equivalency factors, so that an inch of asphalt is equal to a certain number of inches, 2.5 inches of good crushed stone and so on, and they make a trade-off that way. They know the total number of vehicles that they're going to experience over a fairly long period of time, 20 or 25 years, and these, based upon this empirical research, they're able to apply a method like that successfully for a high-type highway. But when you get down to a major change in traffic, and remember my contention is that the addition of resource development traffic on a state highway isn't going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. But if, for some reason or other, there was a huge increase in truck traffic on a given state highway, then that too would foreshorten the life of the road. But their methodology, they haven't adopted a methodology yet to be able to deal with that. Now, Federal Highway Administration is in the active process of developing this mechanistic design methodology, and the project that we're doing for the state DOT on the seasonal modeling will make it possible for them to do that. So I would expect that within a couple of years' time, they'll be using the methods that we're talking about here. The methods that we're talking about here are used across the whole United States except in the Northeast, and you hardly ever see it used in the Northeast, which I guess proves that anybody with a briefcase and 50 miles away from home is an expert, right? Don, you want to take over?
Thank you, Lynn. I think we have to move along in order to keep things going. I will tell you that Lynn is very accessible. He's actually going to go load up donuts and coffee and bring them back and put them on our table. He'll be here during the break to ask questions, and you should feel free to contact Lynn at Cornell Local Roads if you want to have him come to your area and speak. They do a highway school at Ithaca College in about a month, so there's many opportunities for you to get together this information.